My name is Silvia Lee. I am currently the Director of Customer Success at Layer. I also am the host and help produce a podcast called Tangents by Out of Architecture. And you're watching A Student's Perspective.
Hi there, and thanks for tuning in to A Student's Perspective, the weekly series that connects students with designers, manufacturers, educators, industry professionals, and design media celebrities to hear their stories on just how they've gotten to where they are now. Through our conversations, we connect the past, present, and future of design to show just how much we can learn from each other to grow towards our fullest potential without prescribed limitations. Think of A Student's Perspective as a weekly design lecture series from the student's point of view. A Student's Perspective is a division of the nonprofit University Hall of Innovation, whose goals are to connect students with the design industry through design challenges and mentorship, and a collaboration with the Marywood University Interior Architecture Program in Scranton, Pennsylvania. All interviews can be found in their video format at www.astudentsperspective.tv. For more information or sponsorship inquiries, please contact universityhallofinnovation@gmail.com.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on A Student's Perspective. I'm Gabriella, and today we're with Silvia Lee. So if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself to start.
So I am currently an architect, but about 2 years or so ago, during the pandemic, I started my transition away from architecture into more technology-facing roles. And the companies do produce products for architects, so there is overlap in that, but I found that I really enjoyed a lot of the things that I was missing from a traditional architecture job in the industry and the profession I was able to find in tech. So I'm actually very happy with that transition.
Definitely. And then did you feel like in school there was definitely less that more the traditional side of architecture, and then as you started to navigate your career path, you found that love for the more technical side of things?
I would say that I've actually always had this really big appreciation that, when you're in school, you don't really know exactly what you're doing or getting towards sometimes because you're still learning all of it. You're just kind of trying to get through things, sometimes it feels like. So through all my studies, I've always loved how you would take an idea and make it into something in real life. You have to kind of take another person on a journey through this story that you're creating of an idea. So in architecture, we do in certain ways with, models and drawings, but I've always enjoyed that. And I felt that in school and in practice, we were given the skills and learned how to communicate. And that has always stayed the same. And that is why I also appreciate doing that in tech, because of the startup nature of things. You still have to very quickly be able to communicate to somebody something that doesn't exist. So you would be utilizing the same way, like sketches, like snippets of words, diagrams, anything that you have at your disposal, you will be using to communicate ideas. And I find that the same in both, and that's what I appreciate in both.
Definitely. That's so interesting. I love how you mentioned the storytelling part of it, because another architect I was speaking to recently said, I was asking her like what helps to set her apart in the world of architecture, and one of the main things she was talking about was storytelling, because anybody can just have like a really great portfolio, but how do you kind of distinguish yourself in that, like telling a story? Do you have any maybe advice for that aspect of storytelling?
I think if you can find the connection yourself to why it's meaningful to you, that enjoyment, that joy, that passion is really what I find translates among different people or throughout different types of careers as well. Like my friends who have different professions, I still enjoy listening to what they do with their day because I can see the same rigor, the same process through it all. So I usually really try to connect everything I do to like why it's meaningful to me, and that helps me become a better so like I do marketing in some of my roles now. So I was an architect. I understand the pain points. And now when I'm making products or trying to explain products to people of what we do, I'm always connecting to why they should care, why I care, and why it's important.
Definitely. That's so good. So now you were specifically an architect, and now you're working more in the marketing side of things, correct? So I was just wondering, do you have any advice on understanding the customer's goals and really like having that attention to detail?
Sure. Attention to detail is like one of my fallback strong suits that I like to do. As an architect, you have all these moving parts, so you try to file them away into like some kind of system that makes sense. And that's how I was able to catch like if we move something, does it correspond to all these different codes that dictate your minimum like corridor widths or things like that. So you always have like all of these references in your head. So I think now as a marketer or and also with startups, you kind of wear many hats, which is very something that architects are very familiar with because of all the different contexts that you have to keep in your head. So I think as a marketer, I think it was a very natural transition to be on the customer success side of things because it's actually a somewhat new category. I like it a lot. I resonate with the fact that you want to work with your customers so that your product is offering a solution to them that helps them continually, that their success is intertwined with your product and using your product. But I think that's actually very helpful because as architects, we're designing for the client's wishes and we're using our expertise to make sure that um, their wants are translated into something that with our opinion, they might have a want for something, but we can translate that into something that will be beneficial to them in the end. And I think it's really just listening to the customer, working with them together, and using your best judgment because that, in the end, I think is what all of our customers go to. They're not trying to create the answers for themselves. They're looking to us to create a solution.
Yeah, that's so good. It just makes me think about like all the projects we do in school now are very focused on like what we want to create. And there, even though there's a prompt to answer, we don't really have a client yet. So it definitely is difficult to then go out into the real world and have a client to deal with and have all of these requirements to meet. So I guess maybe what was something that helped you going from, I mean, if did you have the same experience in school where it was very much what you wanted to create, and then going into the real world and then finding that there's a lot more kind of hoops to go through?
I think this applies in many different situations in life where actually the restrictions which force some pressure onto the project also is how you create the solution. I find that if I have an unlimited ways to go about it, you have to start implementing some kind of structure into it to kind of create a path through. Like if I am sitting at a blank piece of paper, just like going through many different things in my head, I would be stuck there for hours. But if I can just put something down onto paper or create something, now it's more digital. So if I can just put together like a mock-up of something, sometimes I'll like screen capture things from a website just to have a base to work off of and edit that. And I feel like once you start putting things together, you can see your ideas, do they fit or not? And all of these limitations or codes or restrictions is kind of where the beauty comes from because I think in the end, when you have your final product, you can see the process through which they have come through and all the different steps and iterations and reasons you had to adjust. And I feel like that's something that you can relate to very strongly while you're in school. And I think you should look to those, not restrictions, but like what is defining the project when you're out in in a real office because you don't want to spend their endless times just iterating different types of things. You want to try to be effective with your time. So finding some things to respond to earlier and then just putting your ideas forth is a good way to just get things moving.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so you also mentioned that you're a podcast host at Tangent for Out of Architecture. What has been your experience with that? How do you think that's helped you in your career today?
I loved being able to just hear people's stories. I found that when you're in an office and you're working on a project, it's very easy to just kind of feel very isolated because you're not really talking as much to other people and it's very work focused. But when I moved out of architecture, I found out that like the struggles that I had like on projects or in offices that a lot of other people felt similarly as well. And I think just that connection is so impactful and it's really nice to just have that. Sometimes you'll have friends in school or like coworkers or friends from school that work in different jobs and they all have the same struggles. But it's also sometimes when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to have a conversation with someone else. So I really appreciated just hearing so many people's different stories and the way that their lives went through that. So like I have my own experiences, but it's really nice to see what other people have done as well. And I think also another thing from meeting people through tangents is that I love seeing the ways that architects have all these skills. Like I tend to be a little more organized, and I think I do like the graphic nature of things and the even the marketing side, the storytelling side, but other people may be more technical or more hands-on. So it's really amazing just to see what architects can do. And I think that was my goal with Tangents. I wanted people to see the various skills they can do and how amazing and awesome what the things that they were up to.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's so true. Like it's really helpful to foster community in school with the people that we're working with. We're all going through the same thing. But when you're in like the thick of it, it's hard to see the end goal and like what you want to eventually accomplish. So talking to those people is definitely beneficial and we can learn a lot from them. So doing that, kind of going off of that, do you have any advice for people who maybe don't know what they want to do in the field and are in school right now, just trying to discern what they want to do?
I would say that at the end of the day, you're spending a lot of your time and effort because I feel like, we throw so much of ourselves into our projects, regardless of what they are for work or for fun. So try to always find a connection to it. Try to always add a direction. Like, don't just mindlessly do things, which, I've been there where sometimes there's just so much work to get through that you just care about getting it done and not so much of the details. But, if you've been on a project for 8 months, a year, if you've been like 2 years at plus, you want that time to have meant something. You want your time at your office or your work that you spent there, like, all those, maybe you kind of push off your own plans for that. So I think if you enjoy the people you work with, that's very helpful. If you appreciate the work that you do, that's also helpful. And I think if it kind of can like the term like fill your cup a little, like I think that's all we would really want from our the jobs that we do. So it has to be worth it in the end.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. And I definitely am guilty of that, just kind of like trying to get everything done and not really focusing on like why I'm doing it or like what it means to me. So that's really important to keep in mind, like through our education, I think.
And like it might not be at the end of every day you're gonna like sit down and reflect, but I think to like somehow have a regular cadence of a check-in in some way, like maybe after a milestone or at the end of the week, you can like clear your desk and just kind of like connect back to yourself. I think that's really important because a lot of the times projects can be really long and that's hard. So that's actually why I also appreciate working in tech now, that there's less deadlines and also shorter timelines on projects.
Yeah, I think I would really appreciate that too, because when it's like a semester long project, for example, some people like that's great for them. Like me personally, that's a lot harder for me to stay focused that whole time on that one thing. I prefer like shorter projects like that too. As we're also talking about like education and how we, I guess, put to good use our time here right now. Do you have any advice for maybe maintaining a good balance between school and work and everything else in college? You started to brush on that a little bit when you talked about reflecting sometimes and finding meaning in what we're doing, but do you have anything else to say about that?
I would say that you just have to do it, which, like is easy and hard in the same way. But I will say that I was not on top of things. Like I have no idea where it comes from, where you think you have to be working on your projects all the time, late into the night, like every waking moment. It's not like someone told me to do that, but for some reason, that's what I felt was like
It's the same.
what, yeah, like so, but I also tend to feel that way when I was working in an architecture office that like we could catch up by just working later hours and it's really not healthy or sustainable. So it's really on yourself to say like, at 6 p.m. I'm gonna clock out. And because of that, I gotta make sure I need to get done what I need to get done today. And because I think like, if you have a 3 month deadline, so much of the work happens in the last 4 weeks, the last 2 weeks, you're like staying late every day. And it is really hard. I don't know how to like front load the work either, but we can only try. I will say that, so this is kind of related to life in the savings way, that like, which is relevant too, because architecture salaries are not the highest. So you do have to be mindful of that, that there you can wait till you've like paid off, you feel comfortable enough to be able to save, put money away to your savings every month, but you're probably not going to feel comfortable enough to do that. But if you automate a certain amount to go into your savings, it's taken care of and it's not on you to feel comfortable to do it. And I found that was effective. So if you can create things that, like if you sign up for a class with a friend and you don't want to leave them hanging, then you're out of the door by 6. So maybe not leave it on you yourself to have the willpower or like this the timeliness to get things done and kind of set things up to put that balance into your life.
Yeah, that's such a good point because we could just say like, oh, I'm gonna like start to prioritize these things and do this, but until we actually like plan it into the schedule, it's so much harder. And then yeah, so many people need to hear this. Like, just there's a lot of students who just stay up all night. They use all of their energy, all of the time on all these projects, and it's so important too to just maintain that aspect of wellness, I think, because then we're able to function at our best and do like some of our best work. So I think a lot of people need to hear this for sure. Do you think there's something like growing up that kind of drew you towards the architecture field in general? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I really like technical drawing, and that was a class that we had in high school. So, I would say that it kind of was just like the same way, parents would tell you become a doctor or lawyer. That's like a very stereotypical thing. Um, it was just kind of like, oh, architecture sounds great. Yeah, it is great, but I also had no idea anything about it. But I did always love it. And like, I think the creative aspect plus the technical aspect, because you can have an idea, but there are specific ways to be accurate and design it and draw it. But I think it's nice to see now how vast, like you can take these passions and turn them into many different things. I think I could have liked being a structural engineer, but I never pursued that path. And I wish I just explored a little more what was out there before. But at the same time, I didn't expect to end up in tech, and I do like, and I'm where I am right now. I'm very fortunate that I really like the company I'm with and my coworkers and the projects that we're doing.
Definitely. Okay, so when you're designing for a project and you feel kind of stuck, what are some ways you kind of get out of that creative block? Where do you find your inspiration from?
Yeah, definitely. I kind of like to jump around a little. So, and also for me, I mentioned before, like I like to stay organized. I feel like that's half the battle is just setting things up. And when I have no idea what to do, that's where I get stuck because it's like I just don't know what to do. But there's always probably like one small step you can do just to keep the momentum going, just keep pushing forward. So it's like if you don't know how to get from A to B, just try to cross things off your list that you do know how to do and to just make the task a little smaller, a little manageable, or just try to put something down that like that's why I said like screen capping before, because sometimes instead of starting from scratch, then you have a base that you can edit or put your own ideas onto. So somehow just getting something onto the paper, what if it's like drawing a wall, drawing a structure that you can then put your ideas into.
Yeah, definitely. Like personally, I ran into a lot of creative block last semester. We had to design a staircase on the site was Roosevelt Island, and we were looking at the Queensboro Bridge, and we had to design a staircase that connected pedestrian activity from the island to the bridge so that they could get onto Manhattan or Queens. And just that process of designing the staircase, especially since we had never really done something like that before, because like as you know, the first year is very foundational. You're doing a lot of more abstract things, and then we start to bring in this more reality side of things. So it was hard for me to start designing for that. So I think that's it, just like sketching or like starting with something and then working from there. Like that's helped me a lot, I think. But it can definitely get tricky when you don't really know what to do.
That's a amazing project. I'm very familiar with that. I've taken that bridge a few different times and ways. But also it's funny because stairs is actually just like a fundamental part of a building that like you will definitely be drawing stairs as an architect
Mhm.
many times in your career, like stair sections, stair details. And actually for that in particular, like yeah, that's a very like, like no one answers this question on a day-to-day
Yeah.
example, but I feel like if I was stuck, I would just try to like, I never really got this from school, like, but that you were supposed to kind of have a vision and then create like this a story, if you will, like or and then what does it look like if you wanted to emphasize like wind or something like that. So I think it's like putting your own view on things and then just seeing what that would look like at like every part of the building, which I actually is one of my favorite parts about architecture, that you can take an idea and it can be from as small of a detail to as big of a concept for your project. And I think that's kind of fun.
That is so cool. Yeah. And like looping back to what we were talking about before with making that time to not just constantly be working on a project, I think that just allowing your mind to like if you engage in like play or like do something other than work, that actually is stimulating more ideas for the work that you have to do. And like that's why it's so important. People don't realize. But yeah, definitely.
Absolutely, actually. Like I take so much influence from other things that like okay, like I won't encourage scrolling on Instagram, but I do use it like if I like a visual or like so now that I do like a little marketing, if I see a post I like, I will use it as inspiration, like a Pinterest board or sort. Like I will save it because I like the graphics or I like the way that they're communicating information. So, and I feel like you can take ideas from anywhere. So definitely being exposed to more things and then just getting back in touch with the things that like excite you are always good ways. That's actually how I kind of pursued opportunities outside of work, is just because I thought it was an interesting project that I just wanted to know more about.
Yeah, that's so cool. Do you have any advice for students putting together their portfolio? Because we're told a lot we have to have a lot of continuity. And how do you not be restrained by this like consistent style that you have to develop and let yourself explore different paths, but also show that like you need that continuity, obviously. So do you have any words on that?
Yeah, I would try to have fun with it as much as possible. Like, I know it's hard. Like, you have to document everything. I would document everything like more than once because like the picture wasn't right, the angle. It's a lot of work, but try to get ahead of it by just like maybe document all of your work and then just put the images and the text onto your files before you even start kind of figuring out what the storyline is. But and also try to highlight who you are as much as possible. Like I know like some people really like to sketch. So if you have hand sketching that you've done, like include it as little like side pieces that kind of add to it, even if you didn't need to do it for the project, because there's always the brief. Like you'll do this when you have to put together resumes to apply to jobs. But if you kind of take a look at as the person who will be viewing your resume or portfolio, if you have an intention that you want to share with them, like I'm really good at this or I'm really passionate about this and I really would be a great fit for your company, or like what do you want to tell the viewer of that piece of material, and make sure that that translates through what you're saying and what you're showing, because that you need that intention putting into your work to show outside. But also like I feel like if you can have fun with it, I don't know, depending on like who the recipient is, but maybe have a little fun with the fonts or this text or the layouts, like make it personal to you, because I think these are our skills as an architect. Like it, I feel like at work, it doesn't really matter how you do it, what it is, as long as you convey effectively the idea and it's in a way that they can receive those ideas.
Definitely. Yeah, and like me personally too, I'm a lot more of a words person, so I'll like fall into the like trying to describe everything about it instead of just having like my work speak for itself. So I think yeah, that personal aspect is really important. Okay, and we brushed on this a little bit before when we talked about storytelling and how that's one way to set yourself apart. Are there any other ways you can inspire people to, or designers in general, to set themselves apart when they're in an interview or anything like that? Because there's just so much happening today and there's so many different styles and approaches, and how can we like set ourselves apart?
Let's see, let me think. There's a few ways I could come at this. I think ultimately what you want to convey, this is actually from my interviewing different people about like, because a big part of actually out of architecture is that you have a lot of skills that mostly aligned to what we understand or interviewers understand for architects. But when you try to switch industries, you now have to kind of reframe your story. But I would say also as architects, you have to be the expert on different topics. And I've learned along the way that you'll never get to a place where you already have all the information you need. There will always be something that you have to research and become the expert on, even if you are not. So that skill I think is very helpful. And I think when you're trying to convey to other people, for your projects or for a job that you have these skills and you just need to let them know that you are the expert. So I think one, speaking confidently about your own experiences, but you should feel confident about your own experiences because um, this is how you're viewing your story. And I think also regularly working on your resume has actually been very helpful for me because I think every year or a little over a year, I would probably try to apply to a job because something came along that was really interesting to me, and I would just try it out. And that's been helpful because my resume was always ready for those new ones. I would just have to update a little bit, not like 2 jobs worth of work. And then the reflection of writing out what I did helped me feel more confident about yeah, I did do a lot on that project. Like I had to coordinate everything, like just so many different pieces of work. So I think it's nice for people to understand how your own impact. And so you have to do your own reflection. So I think it goes both ways. It gives you confidence, but then you can speak from that easier when you have to tell people your work. So I think whatever you found important or interesting is game to share to someone else as an example of how you are capable of doing the work.
Yeah, such a good point. And since architecture is such an interdisciplinary field and there's so many different things you can bring into it, just having that base out of school and then showing the employer that there's so many more things that you can look into and we're always learning and growing. So great. All right. So my last question for you is if you could go back to school and tell yourself some advice for you right now, what would you tell yourself from the past?
To try more things and be a little less scared. I think actually the little less scared part, I feel like if when I made a mistake in a way, I tried something and it wasn't exactly right, it didn't land essentially. My takeaway from that, throughout my younger years was that don't do that, avoid that, trying to avoid those feelings. But it's inevitable that you should be trying out a lot of different things and learning from what didn't work out. And sometimes it just that professor didn't resonate with what you were doing. That's okay. You put so much emphasis on your studio classes especially, but I feel like as long as you found value from it, you connected to it, you did your best, you did the hard work, and that's great. That's all you need to do. So I think to really embrace who you are, what you put out there, and let that be enough because don't give yourself extra stress. There's enough stresses in the world, and to not be afraid of messing up along the way and just keep going from that because it's I think that's kind of related to tech. You can't hold anything so precious in a startup. You have to just try a lot of things very quickly and pivot when they're not really producing the results you need. So if I got a little more comfortable with that earlier on in my life, maybe I would be a little more fearless now and try on more things while I was younger.
Definitely. It's so comforting to hear too, because when you make all these mistakes in school, it's you get really frustrated and it's hard to keep moving forward. But from the perspective of afterwards, which we can't see right now, it's going to be okay. These mistakes are all pointing us towards a better future eventually. So that's so good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was so nice getting to know you. For joining us this week, and if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, comment, and share, and make sure to tune in next week as the conversation continues from a student's perspective.
We hope you liked this discussion with the design industry from a student's perspective. Please like, share, and comment, and stay tuned for more inspiring conversations to come.